So what I thought that we can do in this a bit shorter video is to make the view portion of our application our sort of template. If you remember, if you're new to this series, we are making one model view controller based object-oriented CMS, and we've made the controllers, and we will now want to make the views. If you remember the slides, we've made the controller, and we are now going to make the views, which is the portion of model view controller that is dedicated to making the logic, the presentation logic for the clients, for the browsers, and for our users, which will basically format all the data and take care of presenting the data to the user. So what I thought first that we can do is that we can move this home page so that it follows the same principle as the other controllers. So like the About Us controller. So we can make one home page. Instead of just including this HTML, we are going to make it as a controller so that it's object oriented. And it will show the home page. If I refresh, everything is the same, or not, nothing is the same, and that's because we are not even calling this homepage controller. So let's make it quickly. And then we are going to use the homepage controller to call our run action, in this case, the action that we got from this post or the get. If we refresh now, we see that there is an error, and that's because I was typing too fast and forgot the semicolon. And now we have the home page as the object. So the easiest way to make the view portion or the templating portion of the application, there is of course multiple ways, but we can just start by making one object that will basically take care of this presenting, because here we want to do a lot of things inside of this controller. For example, we will fetch the SEO data from the database and get the data, the page data, like titles and subtitles. So we'll have a lot of variables here, like title and then content and then variable 1, etc., etc. And we don't need each and every of these variables inside of our view. We just want to work there to separate the concerns of the view with just the data that is being relevant to the view, something that's actually going to be formatted and presented. And we can do that by using the objects. And here we can just make one object inside of our source that will be the, let's call it view, or no, maybe template. And it will be the class. That will basically have one method for now, and that will be our render view, or let's just call it a view, because it will be easier to call it in our controllers. And we want it dynamic, so we need the template name here that we are going to include. So instead of this just including the page from here, we want to include that page from here. And here we will put our template variable that will get us to our desired view file, the HTML file. And from here, we are just going to call one view, or no, not the template object, which will be a new template. And then from template, we want to call the view with the home page string. In this case, I'm just going to use the home page because the HTML will easily be added later. And as a matter of fact, we might go away from the HTML to using something like TMPL or whatever, so that we just know that it is our sort of template sort. So this could be a constant that we are going to use each time we include some file. Let's just include this template inside our bootstrap. So this will be one day moved from the index page PHP, because we don't want everything bloated here. But for now, we don't want to complicate things more than they are needed to. So we'll just include the template PHP. If we refresh our page, everything is still working. And that is because we have basically moved the home page logic to the view method of this file. Now, as mentioned here, we need a title, the page title, to be something from database. In this page home, in this case, home page title, for example. We also want the page content to be from database, because this is a content management system, and we want somebody, the administrator of the website, to be able to manage that system, to edit the information dynamically. So here we will have the welcome to our homepage. Very creative, I know. but we need a way to pass this variable, and not just these two, a lot more, for example, SEO and navigation, and to check if user is logged in or not. So there will be a lot of things going on here in controllers, and we want to pass only the relevant information to our view files. Of course, there are multiple ways to do that, but the easiest one is to group all the variables into one, well, let's call it a variables array, where we want to put each and every key, the variable that we want to contain the data. And here we can just put the variable's title and the variable's content inside one array, and we want to pass this array of variables with the page that we want to display. This way, we are only moving things, we are only providing this method with things that are relevant to it, keeping the scope to the minimum. That way we can basically test this view, we can test this template variable, class, outside of context of this CMS. We can reuse it in another project, and we're making a very robust application that is pretty much self-dependent. In this case, I'm referring to this template module. So here inside of our template, because this HTML template is inside of this scope of this method, this variables is available. So if we just var dump the variables, we should be able to see the content of it. In this case, it has the title and content, but now we want to make it a bit easier to work with. So we can basically extract the variables title and content from this array and make them a bit easier to work with. And we can do that by just calling the PHP extract function. And then in our template HTML, in this case, our homepage template, instead of having hard-coded title here, homepage, we can just echo title, right? And if we refresh, it works, homepage title is being displayed. Let's remove this content here and put the one that we are getting from our controller. So we'll use the same thing, PHP echo content. And now we have the data coming from our database, which means that our view, now the HTML, is completely dynamic. In this case, it's not from database, it's coming from this controller, but very soon we will make the database connection as well. And now this is sort of now the controller is taking care of retrieving the data, something that will be done through the models. But our views are not concerned with the data itself, they're just concerned with presentation. If you remember what we talked about splitting the concerns, the controllers are there just asking and pointing to right things, model is there getting and storing the data, and the view is just presenting the data. It doesn't need to know what the data is. As a matter of fact, we can now see that our homepage looks pretty much the same as the About Us page. If you remember, we just copied the About Us page to make the homepage, or vice versa. But what we can do now in About Us page is also basically use the homepage, and it makes more sense to change it now from homepage to something like static page. And I will show you quickly how it's that relevant. So let's call it static page. And here we need to include that static page, right? If I refresh now, everything's working still. But if we go now to the About Us page, we're still including that file directly. However, if we copy this and we go to the About Us page, instead of including this file here, we don't actually need the About Us HTML. If we can just delete it from here. Why? Because we've made one static page and we are now passing the content that we want to display. So here it will be the About Us page and the About Us content of the page. If I refresh now, we are still having the About Us page being displayed, even though we just deleted the HTML, and it's working properly. And if I go to the home page, we have the home page. And this is basically the essence of any CMS: reusable content and reusable templates and reusable themes in a sense. However, we still don't have the themes. If I go now to the static page, we can see that we are pretty much dedicated to this layout here. But if you remember, our contact page is showing that I have submitted the form, and that is because I already did it. If I would clear the site data, I would get a form here, and this form does not fit inside of these title and content restraints. So what we need is removing the content of the page from the layout of the page now. Now the layout of the page is sort of like a theme of our website. So we can make one folder inside the view called the layout. And here we can make a something that will become our theme file or the layout file. Let's call it, I don't know, the default, because I'm that creative. And now what we want to do with this static page is we want to remove the page layout itself from the website layout. I'll show you what I mean. Everything above this starter template here and everything below this static page, this content portion, is also part of the layout. If I move it here, now this is where we want to include our static page, our contact form, our Google Maps, whatever. So this is portion where we want to display centralized content of the page. If I would now to refresh our static page or the home page, for example, we will only get that content because we have basically removed all the HTML related to the layout, but we have given no way to our static page to know what is the layout of the page. And the easiest way to get the entire layout now, since we removed it from the page content, is to basically go to our template object, template class, and here, instead of including the template itself, we want to include the layout itself, which will then include the template. So this include portion should be put here. And here, instead of this template, we are going to include the layout default HTML. And since this layout default layout HTML is inside of this scope of this function, this template variable is the same way available to it from here. If I were to refresh this one, it's not working because I forgot to put the PHP. And even though this is HTML file, we are including it from the PHP, and then PHP will basically parse it as if it is the PHP file. So if I refresh, we are still getting the homepage title, complete homepage title, even though our static page that we are asking for contains only a small portion of the entire website. Now, how is this useful? Let's do the same for the contact us page, and we will just see one quick benefit from this. If I would, from the contact us page, remove everything that is above the form, below the form, because that is now inside our layout, right? So we only have the form. Let's go to the contact us page. We have only the form information, and let me just remove this image because I see that it's not being loaded. Now if we go to our contact controller, and if we start, instead of directly including the file, if we continue our logic of using the view portion that we are using into the about us, so here where we're displaying the form, let's just ask it to, instead of showing the static page, we want to show the contact us page. And here we want to put the, for example, contact us page. And what we have here, we have this as a title, right? That's what we just entered, title. And instead of this build form with floating blah, 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 we are going to get something from the database. In our case, something temporarily from the controller. Well, we want to show the echo content. And here will be, please write us a message. If we refresh now contact page, we have the data from the database coming soon, and we have the form loaded, but we also have the rest of the application coming here together, which means that we have now only a single place where our layout is being defined, and we have also the navigation on a single place. Here, this is our navigation, where we can just put the route for the home and the link for the about contact us. And now if I go here, I can see that link is existing on both homepage and both contact page. And let's also put it into the about us page here. So here it will be about us. So let's move this one above and one below. And now we have the about us, the home page, and the contact page. And each of those pages are using the default template, which means that these links now are edited on only one places instead of having the copy of code in multiple places. As a matter of fact, we can now even extract this navigation from the default, and we can just cut it from here and paste it here in navigation. And here, let's just include the navigation itself, right? Layout navigation.html. And everything should work just fine, except that we are now cleaning our HTML and having it more easier to maintain because we have only one place. We don't have copies of portions of the page. And then that way we can just change our default layout here, change the footer, whatever, it will be reflected in all and every page on our application. Now you've seen that I've included and written this included a lot of files, and written this includes basically relatively. Now this could be a bit tricky, a bit of problematic when we are moving our application from our development. It might not even work with your server if you are writing on Linux or on Macintosh, because I'm hard coding this directory separator here, and I am using the include relative on the index file here, which is not the best practice. It's always good to include absolute path to the file, but the absolute path can change, meaning that this index file is now here, but it might move around. So the best way to do that is to introduce one constant that will, each and every time application is run, that constant will be set dynamically or statically based from our data from our server, which means that this index file, because that index file is always the entrance to the application, it will define the root of our application, and then we can include all the other files absolutely rather than relatively based on the index file. So if you move your application to the subfolder, or if you're including images, etc., those files will always be absolute and you will always get the absolute path. So let's do that right now. So we will just define one constant, which will be the root path, and it will be based on the directory of this index file. So it will be the dir name of the file constant that we get from the PHP itself. And then we can just append one directory separator, because in the case of Windows, directory separated is like this, /, and in Windows and Macintosh it's the backslash. Then we can even define one view path, for example, which will be a derivative from the root path and inside the view folder. Let's add one more directory separator at the end. So if our view location changes, or if we introduce the subfolder or the new theme for the views, then we can just change one and single place, and as long as we are using this view path, we are all good to go, because the application will just use that what is being set here dynamically. So instead of this require once, I should require once the root path, and everything works in browser still. And then the view path is something that we should actually, this require should be here as well, and just check to everything works. And the view path is something that we should change inside of our view or the template. So here we are going to include the view path, but we don't need this view. We just need to go to the layout. Let's see if everything works, and it does. And inside this default, we are also going to include the view path, the layout. And this way we are absolutely including the files rather than relatively. And this is pretty much everything that is there for the view, at least at this stage of the application. There will be much more things like formatting and doing things on the data. But for now, this is pretty much the view portion there. It is controlling what is being displayed. It is taking control of how the data is being formatted, as you've seen in our templates. It is taking care of all that part, but it's not actually taking care of data. The data is coming from another place, in this case our controller, but very soon it will come from the model or the database. And I mentioned about the scope, and I just wanted to quickly show what the scope means here. It means that the view has its own scope, which means that all these variables are available only to this template. And now we are hard coding this default layout here. But if we would to, for example, put this somewhere in database so that it can be defined per user, or that web page administrator would like to change the layout, to install a new theme, for example, which is a common thing. For example, on the New Year's around holidays, there might be a different theme that's being displayed. Then we want this dynamic as well. For now, we can just inject it into our template, for example, in our home page. Here we want somehow to tell to the template which layout should it use. And here we can make one variable like a private layout. And now, since this is a private variable, we need to set it somehow. Since it is private, it cannot be accessed outside of this template. There are three types. There are private, there is a protected, which is accessible from inside and children. And there is also public, which is accessible from everywhere. And what that means? It means that the private variable is available only from this class as mentioned. So if we would go to, let me close everything else. If we would go to our home page and try here to set the template, to set this variable, we don't even get it here. The editor is smart enough to understand the context and to understand the scope. So the editor is only giving us the access by from everywhere. I'm writing terribly. But the point is that other variables are not accessible from here. So if we would to set the layout from here to the default layout, we will get an error. It means that there is a fatal error that we cannot access private property template layout because it's private, right? So we need to set it somehow. The easiest way is to just inject it here while we are creating the template, because the template must know which layout it needs. So we'll just call it the default. And here in our template, we can make one constructor that will set this layout to the layout we are giving here. And now our home page should work because it knows which template it should load. It is this layout from here, right? And everything works fine. But if we go to our About Us page, it doesn't work because we are not passing this argument to the constructor. And we can either do that here and put the layout. The layout, the default. So let's put it into our contact page as well, here on the default action. Now, if you remember, after submitting this form, we also have this thank you for contacting us page. However, you can see that now navigation is suddenly back to where we were before, and that is because we are on the thank you for contacting us. We are not using the template engine. So let's quickly make that one the case on the submit form action as well. So instead of this contact us thank you page, we can basically just use the static page, right? Because it's the exactly same layout of the page as we had from before. So on our thank you for contacting us page, we can just put the thank you for contacting us, or let's just change it to thank you for your message. We reply into business day. We can put we will get back to you. Now we can remove this contact us thank you page. We don't need it anymore, right? Because we are using our static page. So we are even more reducing the number of pages that we are working, the amount of code that we have, and that is always a good thing. If I would to refresh this one again, we will not see the thank you because we have already submitted the form, right? And let's fix this one as well, because that one is also not using the navigation. And here we can as well use instead of already contact us HTML, we can just use the static page. So we can delete this contact us already contacted page. And here we can just put that you have already submitted the form. And we can just put the please be patient as we process your message, something like that. And if I refresh now, we have this dynamic code message here. And we also have our navigation back. So if I once more delete the site data, if I go to contact us and I submit one more time, we get the thank you message, but we also get all of our links because this is again one static page. So I hope you see where we're going with this template engine and how we are reusing our code, our layout, and reducing the number of pages that we need, and also separating the concerns. I forgot to continue about this. I'm sorry, I've been drifting away a bit. I forgot to mention this inside and children and the public access. But basically, what is private is accessible only from inside, what is protected is something that is accessible from inside of the class, like in this controller, but is also accessible inside of the children that are inheriting this class. Like, for example, if I would have the protected some variable here, property, actually, this property is now accessible from here. I can just as well say this some property here, and I can assign it. And I can also assign it from our contact page, because our contact page is extending our controller. So here I have also access to this some property here, right? And I can access it and do something with it. And this will become very handy very soon. However, I cannot go to the index file and change it from here when I'm outside of either the parent or the child. So I cannot say home page controller, and I don't have that property here because it is inside homepage controller and inside our controller set as a protected. If I would to set it to public here, and now I go back all the way up to the index, I will have that some property here because now it's public. Everybody cannot access it from the public sort of perspective. And that is pretty much all there is to the scope of the properties. The same applies to the methods. For example, run action here is the function which is by default public. Let me remove this some property here. But if I would to have some private function or the method, private method, I would be able to access it from here, right? Because I have the private method here. But if I would to go to the child of this controller, which is the homepage controller, and from here I will not have the access to that private method that we just made, this one, because now it's private. If I would to put it to the protected, well, actually this is one control, so don't be confused about this. This will be some method. If I would call this one as protected, now I would have access from here. So there is some method here, and it even shows this a bit key here showing that it is protected, but still I cannot access it from the index because it is protected. It's not public. It's not available from everywhere. Let's just put it to public so that we can see what happens. So public some method here. Now we have the some method available, and that is pretty much all there is to the scope. By working with it, you will understand it much better. Please write me a comment if you think that some of these portions should be explained a bit better. So we will continue making this application in the following videos. So make sure to subscribe to be notified when the videos comes out, and I will see you there. Bye.